as it were unexpectedly rapid chime, as though someone were suddenly jumping forward. It struck 2. I woke up, though I had indeed not been asleep, but lying half-conscious. It was almost completely dark in the narrow, cramped, low-pitched room, cumbered up with an enormous wardrobe and piles of cardboard boxes and all sorts of frippery and litter. The candle end that had been burning on the table was going out, and gave a faint flicker from time to time. In a few minutes there would be complete darkness. I was not long in coming to myself. Everything came back to my mind at once, without an effort, as though it had been in ambush to pounce upon me again. And indeed, even while I was unconscious, a point seemed continually to remain in my memory unforgotten, and round it my dreams moved drearily. But, strange to say, everything that had happened to me in that day seemed to me now, on waking, to be in the far, far away past, as though I had long, long ago lived all that down. My head was full of fumes. Something seemed to be hovering over me, rousing me, exciting me, and making me restless. Misery and spite seemed surging up in me again and seeking an outlet. Suddenly I saw beside me 2 wide-open eyes scrutinizing me curiously and persistently. The look in those eyes was coldly detached, sullen, as it were utterly remote. It weighed upon me. A grim idea came into my brain and passed all over my body, as a horrible sensation, such as one feels when one goes into a damp and mouldy cellar. There was something unnatural in those 2 eyes, beginning to look at me only now. I recalled, too, that during those 2 hours I had not said a single word to this creature, and had, in fact, considered it utterly superfluous. In fact, the silence had for some reason gratified me. Now I suddenly realized vividly the hideous idea, revolting as a spider, of vice, which without love grossly and shamelessly begins with that in which true love finds its consummation. For a long time we gazed at each other like that, but she did not drop her eyes before mine, and her expression did not change, so that at last I felt uncomfortable. "What is your name?" I asked abruptly, to put an end to it. "Liza," she answered, almost in a whisper, but somehow far more graciously, and she turned her eyes away. I was silent. "What weather! The snow! It's disgusting," I said, almost to myself, putting my arm under my head despondently and gazing at the ceiling. She made no answer. This was horrible. "Have you always lived in Petersburg?" I asked a minute later, almost angrily, turning my head slightly towards her. "No. Where do you come from?" "From Riga," she answered reluctantly. "Are you a German?" "No, Russian." "Have you been here long?" "Where?" "In this house." "A fortnight." She spoke more and more jerkily. The candle went out. I could no longer distinguish her face. "Have you a father and a mother?" "Yes. No. I have." "Where are they?" "There, in Riga." "What are they?" "Oh, nothing." "Nothing? Why, what class are they?" "Tradespeople." "Have you always lived with them?" "Yes." "How old are you?" 20. "Why did you leave them?" "Oh, for no reason." That answer meant, "Let me alone. I feel sick, sad." We were silent. God knows why I did not go away. I felt myself more and more sick and dreary. The images of the previous day began of themselves, apart from my will, flitting through my memory in confusion. I suddenly recalled something I had seen that morning when, full of anxious thoughts, I was hurrying to the office. "I saw them carrying a coffin out yesterday, and they nearly dropped it," I suddenly said aloud, not that I desired to open the conversation, but as it were by accident. "A coffin?" "Yes, in the Haymarket. They were bringing it out of a cellar." "From a cellar?" "Oh, not from a cellar, but a basement. Oh, you know, down below, from a house of ill fame. It was filthy all around, egg-shells, litter, a stench. It was loathsome." Silence. "A nasty day to be buried," I began, simply to avoid being silent. "Nasty? In what way?" "Oh, the snow, the wet." I yawned. "It makes no difference," she said suddenly, after a brief silence. "No, it's horrid." I yawned again. "The grave-diggers must have sworn at getting drenched by the snow, and there must have been water in the grave." "Why water in the grave?" she asked, with a sort of curiosity, but speaking even more harshly and abruptly than before. I suddenly began to feel provoked. "Why, there must have been water at the bottom a foot deep. You can't dig a dry grave in Volkovo Cemetery." "Why?" "Why, the place is waterlogged. It's a regular marsh. So they bury them in water. I've seen it myself many times." I had never seen it once. Indeed, I had never been in Volkovo, and had only heard stories of it. "Do you mean to say you don't mind how you die?" "But why should I die?" she answered, as though defending herself. "Why, some day you will die, and you will die just the same as that dead woman. She was a girl like you. She died of consumption. A wench would have died in hospital. She knows all about it already. She said wench, not girl." "She was in debt to her madam," I retorted, more and more provoked by the discussion, "and went on earning money for her up to the end, though she was in consumption. Some sledge-drivers standing by were talking about her to some soldiers and telling them so. No doubt they knew her. They were laughing. They were going to meet in a pot-house to drink to her memory. A great deal of this was my invention." Silence followed, profound silence. She did not stir. "And is it better to die in a hospital?" "Isn't it just the same? Besides, why should I die?" she added irritably. "If not now, a little later." "Why a little later? Why, indeed? Now you are young, pretty, fresh. You fetch a high price. But after another year of this life you will be very different. You will go off." "In a year?" "Oh, anyway, in a year you will be worth less," I continued malignantly. "You will go from here to something lower, another house. A year later to a third, lower and lower, and in 7 years you will come to a basement in the Haymarket. That will be if you were lucky. But it would be much worse if you got some disease, consumption, say, or caught a chill, or something or other. It's not easy to get over an illness in your way of life. If you catch anything, you may not get rid of it, and so you would die." "Well, well, then I shall die," she answered quite vindictively, and she made a quick movement. "But one is sorry." "Sorry for whom?" "Sorry for life." Silence. "Have you been engaged to be married? Huh? What's that to you?" "Oh, I'm not cross-examining you. It's nothing to me." "Why are you so cross?" "Of course you may have had your own troubles. What is it to me? It's simply that I felt sorry." "Sorry for whom?" "Sorry for you." "No need," she whispered, hardly audibly, and again made a faint movement. That incensed me at once. What? I was so gentle with her, and she— Why, do you think that you are on the right path?" "I don't think anything." "That's what's wrong, that you don't think. Realize it while there is still time. There still is time. You are still young, good-looking. You might love, be married, be happy." "Not all married women are happy," she snapped out in the rude, abrupt tone she had used at first. Not all, of course, but anyway it is much better than the life here, infinitely better. Besides, with love one can live even without happiness. Even in sorrow life is sweet. Life is sweet however one lives. But here what is there but foulness? Phew. I turned away with disgust. I was no longer reasoning coldly. I began to feel myself what I was saying, and warmed to the subject. I was already longing to expound the cherished ideas I had brooded over in my corner. Something suddenly flared up in me. An object had appeared before me. Never mind my being here. I am not an example for you. I am, perhaps, worse than you are. I was drunk when I came here, though, I hastened, however, to say in self-defence. Besides, a man is no example for a woman. It's a different thing. I may degrade and defile myself, but I am not any one's slave. I come and go, and that's an end of it. I shake it off, and I'm a different man. But you are a slave from the start. Yes, a slave. You give up everything, your whole freedom. If you want to break your chains afterwards, you won't be able to. You will be more and more fast in the snares. It is an accursed bondage, I know it. I won't speak of anything else. Maybe you won't understand. But tell me, no doubt you are in debt to your madam. There, you see, I added, though she made no answer, but only listened in silence, entirely absorbed. That's a bondage for you. You will never buy your freedom. They will see to that. It's like selling your soul to the devil. And besides, perhaps I too am just as unlucky, how do you know, and wallow in the mud on purpose, out of misery. You know men take to drink from grief. Well, maybe I am here from grief. Come, tell me, what is there good here? Here you and I came together just now, and did not say one word to one another all the time, and it was only afterwards you began staring at me like a wild creature, and I at you. Is that loving? Is that how one human being should meet another? It's hideous, that's what it is. Yes, she assented sharply and hurriedly. I was positively astounded by the promptitude of this yes. So the same thought may have been straying through her mind when she was staring at me just before. So she, too, was capable of certain thoughts. Damn it all! This was interesting. This was a point of likeness, I thought, almost rubbing my hands. And indeed it's easy to turn a young soul like that. It was the exercise of my power that attracted me most. She turned her head nearer to me, and it seemed to me in the darkness that she propped herself on her arm. Perhaps she was scrutinizing me. How I regretted that I could not see her eyes. I heard her deep breathing. "Why have you come here?" I asked her, with a note of authority already in my voice. "Oh, I don't know. But how nice it would be to be living in your father's house. It's warm and free. You have a home of your own. Oh, but what if it's worse than this?" I must take the right tone, flashed through my mind. I may not get far with sentimentality. But it was only a momentary thought. I swear she really did interest me. Besides, I was exhausted and moody, and cunning so easily goes hand in hand with feeling. "Who denies it?" I hastened to answer. "Anything may happen. I am convinced that someone has wronged you, and that you are more sinned against than sinning. Of course, I know nothing of your story, but it's not likely a girl like you has come here of her own inclination." "A girl like me?" she whispered, hardly audibly, but I heard it. Damn it all, I was flattering her. That was horrid. But perhaps it was a good thing. She was silent. "See, Liza, I will tell you about myself. If I had had a home from childhood, I shouldn't be what I am now. I often think that. However bad it may be at home, anyway, they are your father and mother, and not enemies, strangers. Once a year at least they'll show their love of you. Anyway, you are at home. I grew up without a home, and perhaps that's why I've turned so unfeeling." I waited again. Perhaps she doesn't understand, I thought, and indeed it is absurd. It's moralizing. If I were a father and had a daughter, I believe I should love my daughter more than my sons, really. I began indirectly, as though talking of something else to distract her attention. I must confess I blushed. "Why so?" she asked. Ah, so she was listening. "I don't know, Liza. I knew a father who was a stern, austere man, but used to go down on his knees to his daughter, used to kiss her hands, her feet. He couldn't make enough of her, really. When she danced at parties, he used to stand for 5 hours at a stretch, gazing at her. He was mad over her. I understand that. She would fall asleep tired at night, and he would wake to kiss her in her sleep and make the sign of the cross over her. He would go about in a dirty old coat. He was stingy to everyone else, but would spend his last penny for her, giving her expensive presents, and it was his greatest delight when she was pleased with what he gave her. Fathers always love their daughters more than their mothers do. Some girls live happily at home, and I believe I should never let my daughters marry." "What next?" she said, with a faint smile. "I should be jealous. I really should. To think that she would kiss anyone else, that she would love a stranger more than her father. It's painful to imagine it. Of course, that's all nonsense. Of course, every father would be reasonable at last. But I believe before I should let her marry I should worry myself to death. I should find fault with all her suitors. But I should end by letting her marry whom she herself loved. The one whom the daughter loves always seems the worst to the father, you know. That is always so. So many family troubles come from that. Some are glad to sell their daughters rather than marrying them honorably." Ah, so that was it. "Such a thing, Liza, happens in those accursed families in which there is neither love nor God," I retorted warmly. "And where there is no love, there is no sense either. There are such families, it's true, but I'm not speaking of them. You must have seen wickedness in your own family if you talk like that. Truly, you must have been unlucky." That sort of thing mostly comes about through poverty." "And is it any better with the gentry, even among the poor, honest people who live happily?" Yes, perhaps. Another thing, Liza, man is fond of reckoning up his troubles, but does not count his joys. If he counted them up as he ought, he would see that every lot has enough happiness provided for it. And what if all goes well with the family, if the blessing of God is upon it, if the husband is a good one, loves you, cherishes you, never leaves you? There is happiness in such a family. Even sometimes there is happiness in the midst of sorrow, and indeed sorrow is everywhere. If you marry, you will find out for yourself. But think of the first years of married life with one you love. What happiness there sometimes is in it. And indeed it's the ordinary thing. In those early days even quarrels with one's husband end happily. Some women get up quarrels with their husbands just because they love them. Indeed, I knew a woman like that. She seemed to say that because she loved him, she would torment him and make him feel it. You know that you may torment a man on purpose through love. Women are particularly given to that, thinking to themselves, I will love him so, I will make so much of him afterwards, that it is no sin to torment him a little now. And all in the house rejoice in the sight of you, and you are happy and gay and peaceful and honorable. Then there are some women who are jealous. If he went off anywhere, I knew one such woman, she couldn't restrain herself, but would jump up at night and run off on the sly to find out where he was, whether he was with some other woman. That's a pity. And the woman knows herself it's wrong, and her heart fails her, and she suffers. But she loves. It's all through love. And how sweet it is to make up after quarrels, to own herself in the wrong, or to forgive him. And they both are so happy all at once, as though they had met anew, been married over again, as though their love had begun afresh. And no one should know what passes between husband and wife if they love one another, and whatever quarrels there may be between them, they ought not to call in their own mother to judge between them, and tell tales of one another. They are their own judges. Love is a holy mystery, and ought to be hidden from all other eyes, whatever happens. That makes it holier and better. They respect one another more, and much is built on respect. And if once there has been love, if they have been married for love, why should love pass away? Surely one can keep it. It is rare that one cannot keep love. If the husband is kind and straightforward, why should not love last? The first phase of married love will pass, it is true, but then there will come a love that is better still. Then there will be the union of souls. They will have everything in common. There will be no secrets between them. And once they have children, the most difficult times will seem to them happy, so long as there is love and courage. Even toil will be a joy. You may deny yourself bread for your children, and even that will be a joy. They will love you for it afterwards. So you are laying by for your future. As the children grow up, you feel that you are an example, a support for them, that even after you die, your children will always keep your thoughts and feelings, because they have received them from you. They will take on your semblance and likeness. So, you see, this is a great duty. How can it fail to draw the father and mother nearer? People say it's a trial to have children. Who says that? It is heavenly happiness. Are you fond of little children, Liza? I am awfully fond of them. You know, a little rosy baby boy at your bosom, and what husband's heart is not touched, seeing his wife nursing his child? A plump little rosy baby, sprawling and snuggling, chubby little hands and feet, clean tiny little nails, so tiny that it makes one laugh to look at them, eyes that look as if they understand everything, and while it sucks, it clutches at your bosom with its little hand. It plays. When its father comes up, the child tears itself away from the bosom, flings itself back, looks at its father, laughs as though it were fearfully funny, and falls to sucking again. Or it will bite its mother's breast when its little teeth are coming, while it looks sideways at her with its little eyes, as though to say, "Look, I am biting." Is not all that happiness when they are the three together, husband, wife, and child? One can forgive a great deal for the sake of such moments. Yes, Liza, one must first learn to live oneself before one blames others. It's by pictures like that one must get at you, I thought to myself, though I did speak with real feeling, and all at once I flushed crimson. What if she were suddenly to burst out laughing? What should I do then? That idea drove me to fury. Towards the end of my speech I really was excited, and now my vanity was somehow wounded. The silence continued. I almost nudged her. "Why are you—" she began and stopped. But I understood. There was a quiver of something different in her voice, not abrupt, harsh, and unyielding as before, but something soft and shamefaced, so shamefaced that I suddenly felt ashamed and guilty. "What?" I asked, with tender curiosity. "Why, you—" "What?" "Why, you speak somehow like a book," she said, and again there was a note of irony in her voice. That remark sent a pang to my heart. It was not what I was expecting. I did not understand that she was hiding her feelings under irony, that this is usually the last refuge of modest and chaste-souled people, when the privacy of their soul is coarsely and intrusively invaded, and that their pride makes them refuse to surrender to the last moment and shrink from giving expression to their feelings before you. I ought to have guessed the truth from the timidity with which she had repeatedly approached her sarcasm, only bringing herself to utter it at last with an effort. But I did not guess, and an evil feeling took possession of me. Wait a bit, I thought. 7. Oh, hush, Liza. How can you talk about being like a book when it makes even me, an outsider, feel sick? Though I don't look at it as an outsider, for indeed it touches me to the heart. Is it possible that you do not feel sick at being here yourself? Evidently habit does wonders. God knows what habit can do with anyone. Can you seriously think that you will never grow old, that you will always be good-looking, and that they will keep you here forever and ever? I say nothing of the loathsomeness of the life here, though let me tell you this about it, about your present life, I mean. Here, though you are young now, attractive, nice, with soul and feeling, yet you know, as soon as I came to myself just now, I felt at once sick at being here with you. And one can only come here when one is drunk. But if you were anywhere else, living as good people live, I should perhaps be more than attracted by you, should fall in love with you, should be glad of a look from you, let alone a word. I should hang about your door, should go down on my knees to you, should look upon you as my betrothed, and think it an honor to be allowed to. I should not dare to have an impure thought about you. But here, you see, I know that I have only to whistle, and you have to come with me whether you like it or not. I don't consult your wishes, but you mine. The lowest laborer hires himself as a workman, but he doesn't make a slave of himself altogether. Besides, he knows that he will be free again presently. But when are you free? Only think what you are giving up here. What is it you are making a slave of? It is your soul together with your body. You are selling your soul, which you have no right to dispose of. You give your love to be outraged by every drunkard. Love. But that's everything, you know. It's a priceless diamond. It's a maiden's treasure, love. Why, a man should be ready to give his soul, to face death to gain that love. But how much is your love worth now? You are sold, all of you, body and soul, and there is no need to strive for love when you can have everything without love. And you know there is no greater insult to a girl than that. Do you understand? To be sure, I have heard that they comfort you, poor fools, that they let you have lovers of your own here. But you know that's simply a farce, that's simply a sham. It's just laughing at you, and you are taken in by it. Why, do you suppose he really loves you, that lover of yours? I don't believe it. How can he love you when he knows you may be called away from him any minute? He would be a low fellow if he did. Will he have a grain of respect for you? What have you in common with him? He laughs at you and rubs you. That is all his love amounts to. You are lucky if he does not beat you. Very likely he does beat you, too. Ask him, if you have got one, whether he will marry you. He will laugh in your face if he doesn't spit in it or give you a blow, though maybe he is not worth a bad halfpenny himself. And for what have you ruined your life, if you come to think of it? For the coffee they give you to drink and the plentiful meals? But with what object are they feeding you up? An honest girl couldn't swallow the food, for she would know what she was being fed for. You are in debt here, and of course you will always be in debt, and you will go on in debt to the end, till the visitors here begin to scorn you. And that will soon happen. Don't rely upon your youth. All that flies by express train here, do you know? You will be kicked out, and not simply kicked out. Long before that she'll begin nagging at you, scolding you, abusing you, as though you had not sacrificed your health for her. had not thrown away your youth and your soul for her benefit, but as though you had ruined her, beggared her, robbed her. And don't expect anyone to take your part. The others, your companions, will attack you too, win her favour, for all are in slavery here, and have lost all conscience and pity here long ago. They have become utterly vile, and nothing on earth is viler, more loathsome, and more insulting than their abuse. And you are laying down everything here, unconditionally, youth and health and beauty and hope. And at 22 you will look like a woman of 35, and you will be lucky if you're not diseased. Pray to God for that. No doubt you are thinking now that you have a gay time and no work to do. Yet there is no work harder or more dreadful in the world, or ever has been. One would think that the heart alone would be worn out with tears, and you won't dare to say a word, not half a word, when they drive you away from here. You will go away as though you were to blame. You will change to another house, then to a third, then somewhere else, till you come down at last to the Haymarket. There you will be beaten at every turn. That is good manners there. The visitors don't know how to be friendly without beating you. You don't believe that is so hateful there? Go and look for yourself some time. You can see with your own eyes. Once, one New Year's Day, I saw a woman at her door. They had turned her out as a joke, to give her a taste of the frost, because she had been crying so much, and they shut the door behind her. At 9 o'clock in the morning she was already quite drunk, dishevelled, half-naked, covered with bruises. Her face was powdered, but she had a black eye. Blood was trickling from her nose and her teeth. Some cabman had just given her a drubbing. She was sitting on the stone steps. A salt fish of some sort was in her hand. She was crying, wailing something about her luck, and beating with the fish on the steps, and cabmen and drunken soldiers were crowding in the doorway, taunting her. You don't believe that you will ever be like that? I should be sorry to believe it too, but how do you know? Maybe 10 years, 8 years ago, that very woman with the salt fish came here, fresh as a cherub, innocent, pure, knowing no evil, blushing at every word. Perhaps she was like you, proud, ready to take offence, not like the others. Perhaps she looked like a queen, and knew what happiness was in store for the man who should love her, and whom she should love. Do you see how it ended? And what if at that very minute, when she was beating on the filthy steps with that fish, drunken and dishevelled, what if at that very minute she recalled the pure early days in her father's house, when she used to go to school, and the neighbour's son watched for her on the way, declaring that he would love her as long as he lived, that he would devote his life to her, and when they vowed to love one another forever and be married as soon as they were grown up? No, Liza, it would be happy for you if you were to die soon of consumption in some corner, in some cellar, like that woman just now. In the hospital, do you say? You will be lucky if they take you. But what if you are still of use to the madam here? Consumption is a queer disease. It is not like fever. The patient goes on hoping till the last minute, and says he is all right. He deludes himself, and that just suits your madam. Don't doubt it. That's how it is. You have sold your soul, and what is more, you owe money, so you daren't say a word. But when you are dying, all will abandon you, all will turn away from you, for then there will be nothing to get from you. What's more, they will reproach you for cumbering the place, for being so long over dying. However you beg, you won't get a drink of water without abuse. Whenever are you going off, you nasty hussy? You won't let us sleep with your moaning. You make the gentleman sick. That's true. I have heard such things said myself. They will thrust you dying into the filthiest corner in the cellar, in the damp and darkness. What will your thoughts be, lying there alone? When you die, strange hands will lay you out, with grumbling and impatience. No one will bless you, no one will sigh for you. They only want to get rid of you as soon as may be. They will buy a coffin, take you to the grave as they did that poor woman today, and celebrate your memory at the tavern. In the grave, sleet, filth, wet snow. No need to put themselves out for you. Let her down, Vanuha. It's just like her luck. Even here she is head foremost, the hussy. Shorten the cord, you rascal. It's all right as it is. All right, is it? Why, she's on her side. She was a fellow creature, after all. But never mind. Throw the earth on her. They won't care to waste much time quarrelling over you. They will scatter the wet blue clay as quick as they can and go off to the tavern, and there your memory on earth will end. Other women have children to go to their graves, fathers, husbands, while for you neither tear nor sigh nor remembrance. No one in the whole world will ever come to you. Your name will vanish from the face of the earth, as though you had never existed, never been born at all. Nothing but filth and mud, however you knock at your coffin lid at night when the dead arise, however you cry, "Let me out, kind people, to live in the light of day. My life was no life at all. My life has been thrown away like a dishclout. It was drunk away in the tavern at the Haymarket. Let me out, kind people, to live in the world again." And I worked myself up to such a pitch that I began to have a lump in my throat myself, and all at once I stopped, sat up in dismay, and bending over apprehensively, began to listen with a beating heart. I had reason to be troubled. I had felt for some time that I was turning her soul upside down and rending her heart, and the more I was convinced of it, the more eagerly I desired to gain my object as quickly and as effectually as possible. It was the exercise of my skill that carried me away, yet it was not merely sport. I knew I was speaking stiffly, artificially, even bookishly, in fact. I could not speak except like a book. But that did not trouble me. I felt that I should be understood, and that this very bookishness might be an assistance. But now, having attained my effect, I was suddenly panic-stricken. Never before had I witnessed such despair. She was lying on her face, thrusting her face into the pillow and clutching it with both hands. Her heart was being torn. Her youthful body was shuddering all over as though in convulsions. Suppressed sobs rent her bosom, and suddenly burst out in weeping and wailing. Then she pressed closer into the pillow. She did not want any one here, not a living soul, to know of her anguish and her tears. She bit the pillow, bit her hand till it bled. I saw that afterwards. Or, thrusting her fingers into her dishevelled hair, seemed rigid with the effort of restraint, holding her breath and clenching her teeth. I began saying something, begging her to calm herself, but felt that I did not dare. And all at once, in a sort of cold shiver, almost in terror, began fumbling in the dark, trying hurriedly to get dressed to go. It was dark. Though I tried my best, I could not finish dressing quickly. Suddenly I felt a box of matches and a candlestick with a whole candle in it. As soon as the room was lighted up, Liza sprang up, sat up in bed, and with a contorted face, with a half-insane smile, looked at me almost senselessly. I sat down beside her and took her hands. She came to herself, made an impulsive movement towards me, would have caught hold of me, but did not dare, and slowly bowed her head before me. "Liza, my dear, I was wrong. Forgive me, my dear," I began, but she squeezed my hand in her fingers so tightly that I felt I was saying the wrong thing and stopped. "This is my address, Liza. Come to me." "I will come," she answered resolutely, her head still bowed. "But now I am going. Good-bye, till we meet again." I got up. She too stood up, and suddenly, flushed all over, gave a shudder, snatched up a shawl that was lying on a chair, and muffled herself in it to her chin. As she did this, she gave another sickly smile, blushed, and looked at me strangely. I felt wretched. I was in haste to get away, to disappear. "Wait a minute," she said suddenly, in the passage just at the doorway, stopping me with her hand on my overcoat. She put down the candle in hot haste and ran off. Evidently she had thought of something, or wanted to show me something. As she ran away, she flushed, her eyes shone, and there was a smile on her lips. What was the meaning of it? Against my will, I waited. She came back a minute later with an expression that seemed to ask forgiveness for something. In fact, it was not the same face, not the same look as the evening before, sullen, mistrustful, and obstinate. Her eyes now were imploring, soft, and at the same time trustful, caressing, timid. The expression with which children look at people they are very fond of whom they are asking a favour. Her eyes were a light hazel. They were lovely eyes, full of life, and capable of expressing love as well as sullen hatred. Making no explanation, as though I, as a sort of higher being, must understand everything without explanations, she held out a piece of paper to me. Her whole face was positively beaming at that instant with naive, almost childish triumph. I unfolded it. It was a letter to her from a medical student, or someone of that sort. A very high-flown and flowery, but extremely respectful love letter. I don't recall the words now, but I remember well that through the high-flown phrases there was apparent a genuine feeling which cannot be feigned. When I had finished reading it, I met her glowing, questioning, and childishly impatient eyes fixed upon me. She fastened her eyes upon my face, and waited impatiently for what I should say. In a few words, hurriedly, but with a sort of joy and pride, she explained to me that she had been to a dance somewhere in a private house, a family of very nice people, who knew nothing, absolutely nothing, for she had only come here so lately, and it had all happened, and she hadn't made up her mind to stay, and was certainly going away as soon as she had paid her debt. And at that party there had been the student who had danced with her all the evening. He had talked to her, and it turned out that he had known her in old days at Riga when he was a child. They had played together, but a very long time ago, and he knew her parents. But about this he knew nothing, nothing whatever, and had no suspicion. And the day after the dance, 3 days ago, he had sent her that letter through the friend with whom she had gone to the party. And, well, that was all. She dropped her shining eyes with a sort of bashfulness as she finished. The poor girl was keeping that student's letter as a precious treasure, and had run to fetch it, her only treasure, because she did not want me to go away without knowing that she too was honestly and genuinely loved, that she too was addressed respectfully. No doubt that letter was destined to lie in her box and lead to nothing. But none the less, I am certain that she would keep it all her life as a precious treasure, as her pride and justification. And now, at such a minute, she had thought of that letter, and brought it with naive pride to raise herself in my eyes, that I might see, that I too might think well of her. I said nothing, pressed her hand, and went out. I so longed to get away. I walked all the way home, in spite of the fact that the melting snow was still falling in heavy flakes. I was exhausted, shattered, in bewilderment. But behind the bewilderment the truth was already gleaming, the loathsome truth. End of Part 3. Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Apropos to wet snow. Part 4. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Bob Neufeld. 8. It was some time, however, before I consented to recognize that truth. Waking up in the morning after some hours of heavy leaden sleep, and immediately realizing all that had happened on the previous day, I was positively amazed at my last night's sentimentality with Liza, at all those outcries of horror and pity. To think of having such an attack of womanish hysteria! Ah! I concluded. And what did I thrust my address upon her for? What if she comes? Let her come, though. It doesn't matter. But, obviously, that was not now the chief and the most important matter. I had to make haste, and at all costs save my reputation in the eyes of Zverkov and Simonov as quickly as possible. That was the chief business, and I was so taken up that morning that I actually forgot all about Liza. First of all, I had at once to repay what I had borrowed the day before from Simonov. I resolved on a desperate measure, to borrow 15 roubles straight off from Anton Antonitch. As luck would have it, he was in the best of humours that morning, and gave it to me at once, on the first asking. I was so delighted at this that, as I signed the IOU with a swaggering air, I told him casually that the night before I had been keeping it up with some friends at the Hôtel de Paris, and we were giving a farewell party to a comrade. In fact, I might say a friend of my childhood, and, you know, a desperate rake, fearfully spoilt, of course. He belongs to a good family, and has considerable means, a brilliant career. He is witty, charming, a regular Lovelace, you understand. We drank an extra half-dozen, and it went off all right. All this was uttered very easily, unconstrainedly, and complacently. On reaching home, I promptly wrote to Simonov. To this hour I am lost in admiration when I recall the truly gentlemanly, good-humoured, candid tone of my letter. With tact and good breeding, and above all entirely without superfluous words, I blamed myself for all that had happened. I defended myself, if I really may be allowed to defend myself, by alleging that being utterly unaccustomed to wine, I had been intoxicated with the first glass, which, I said, I had drunk before they arrived, while I was waiting for them at the Hôtel de Paris, between 5 and 6 o'clock. I begged Simonov's pardon especially. I asked him to convey my explanations to all the others, especially to Zverkov, whom, I seemed to remember as though in a dream, I had insulted. I added that I would have called upon all of them myself, but my head ached, and besides I had not the face to. I was particularly pleased with a certain lightness, almost carelessness, strictly within the bounds of politeness, however, which was apparent in my style, and better than any possible arguments, gave them at once to understand that I took rather an independent view of all that unpleasantness last night, that I was by no means so utterly crushed as you, my friends, probably imagine, but on the contrary looked upon it as a gentleman serenely respecting himself should look upon it. On a young hero's past no censure is cast. There is actually an aristocratic playfulness about it, I thought admiringly, as I read over the letter, and it's all because I am an intellectual and cultivated man. Another man in my place would not have known how to extricate himself, but here I have got out of it, and am as jolly as ever again, and all because I am a cultivated and educated man of our day. And indeed, perhaps, everything was due to the wine yesterday. No, it was not the wine. I did not drink anything at all between 5 and 6 when I was waiting for them. I had lied to Simonov. I had lied shamelessly, and indeed I wasn't ashamed now. Hang it all, though, the great thing was that I was rid of it. I put 6 roubles in the letter, sealed it up, and asked Apollon to take it to Simonov. When he learned that there was money in the letter, Apollon became more respectful and agreed to take it. Towards evening I went out for a walk. My head was still aching and giddy after yesterday, but as evening came on and the twilight grew denser, my impressions, and following them my thoughts, grew more and more different and confused. Something was not dead within me. In the depths of my heart and conscience it would not die, and it showed itself in acute depression. For the most part I jostled my way through the most crowded business streets, along Meshevchansky Street, along Sadovy Street, and in the Yusupov Garden. I always liked particularly sauntering along these streets in the dusk, just when there were crowds of working people of all sorts going home from their daily work, with faces looking cross with anxiety. What I liked was just that cheap bustle, that bare prose. On this occasion the jostling of the streets irritated me more than ever. I could not make out what was wrong with me. I could not find the clue. Something seemed rising up continually in my soul, painfully, and refusing to be appeased. I returned home completely upset. It was just as though some crime were lying on my conscience. The thought that Liza was coming worried me continually. It seemed queer to me that of all my recollections of yesterday this tormented me, as it were, especially, as it were, quite separately. Everything else I had quite succeeded in forgetting by the evening. I dismissed it all, and was still perfectly satisfied with my letter to Simonov. But on this point I was not satisfied at all. It was as though I were worried only by Liza. What if she comes? I thought incessantly. Well, it doesn't matter. Let her come. It's horrid that she should see, for instance, how I live. Yesterday I seemed such a hero to her, while now... It's horrid, though, that I have let myself go so. The room looks like the beggar's. And I brought myself to go out to dinner in such a suit, and my American leather sofa with the stuffing sticking out, and my dressing-gown which will not cover me, such tatters, and she will see all this, and she will see Apollon. That beast is certain to insult her. He will fasten upon her in order to be rude to me. And I, of course, shall be panic-stricken as usual. I shall begin bowing and scraping before her and pulling my dressing-gown round me. I shall begin smiling, telling lies. Oh, the beastliness! And it isn't the beastliness of it that matters most. There is something more important, more loathsome, viler. Yes, viler. And to put on that dishonest lying mask again. When I reached that thought, I fired up all at once. Why dishonest? How dishonest? I was speaking sincerely last night. I remember there was real feeling in me, too. What I wanted was to excite an honorable feeling in her. Her crying was a good thing. It will have a good effect. Yet I could not feel at ease. All that evening, even when I had come back home, even after 9 o'clock, when I calculated that Liza could not possibly come, still she haunted me, and what was worse, she came back to my mind always in the same position. One moment out of all that had happened last night stood vividly before my imagination. The moment when I struck a match and saw her pale, distorted face with its look of torture. And what a pitiful, what an unnatural, what a distorted smile she had at that moment. But I did not know then that 15 years later I should still, in my imagination, see Liza, always with the pitiful, distorted, inappropriate smile which was on her face at that minute. Next day I was ready again to look upon it all as nonsense, due to overexcited nerves, and above all as exaggerated. I was always conscious of that weak point of mine, and sometimes very much afraid of it. I exaggerate everything. That is where I go wrong, I repeated to myself every hour. But, however, Liza will very likely come all the same, was the refrain with which all my reflections ended. I was so uneasy that I sometimes flew into a fury. She'll come. She is certain to come, I cried, running about the room. If not today, she will come tomorrow. She'll find me out. The damnable romanticism of these pure hearts. Ah, the vileness, ah, the silliness, ah, the stupidity of these wretched sentimental souls! Why, how fail to understand? How could one fail to understand? But at this point I stopped short, and in great confusion indeed. And how few words I thought in passing were needed! How little of the idyllic, and affectedly, bookishly, artificially idyllic too, had sufficed to turn a whole human life at once according to my will! That's virginity, to be sure. Freshness of soil. At once a thought occurred to me, to go to her, to tell her all, and beg her not to come to me. But this thought stirred such wrath in me that I believed I should have crushed that damned Liza if she had chanced to be near me at the time. I should have insulted her, have spat at her, have turned her out, have struck her. One day passed, however, another and another. She did not come, and I began to grow calmer. I felt particularly bold and cheerful after 9 o'clock. I even sometimes began dreaming, and rather sweetly. I, for instance, became the salvation of Liza, simply through her coming to me and my talking to her. I develop her, educate her. Finally, I notice that she loves me passionately. I pretend not to understand. I don't know, however, why I pretend, just for effect, perhaps. At last, all confusion, transfigured, trembling and sobbing, she flings herself at my feet and says that I am her saviour, and that she loves me better than anything in the world. I am amazed, but, Liza, I say, can you imagine that I have not noticed your love? I saw it all, I divined it, but I did not dare to approach you first, because I had an influence over you, and was afraid that you would force yourself, from gratitude, to respond to my love, would try to rouse in your heart a feeling which was perhaps absent, and I did not wish that, because it would be tyranny. It would be indelicate. In short, I launch off at that point into European, inexplicably lofty subtleties à la George Sand. But now you are mine. You are my creation. You are pure. You are good. You are my noble wife. Into my house come bold and free, its rightful mistress there to be. Then we began living together, go abroad, and so on and so on. In fact, in the end, it seemed vulgar to me myself, and I began putting out my tongue at myself. Besides, they won't let her out, the hussy, I thought. They don't let them go out very readily, especially in the evening. For some reason I fancied she would come in the evening, and at 7 o'clock precisely. Though she did say she was not altogether a slave there yet, and had certain rights. So, damn it all, she will come. She is sure to come. It was a good thing, in fact, that Apollon distracted my attention at that time by his rudeness. He drove me beyond all patience. He was the bane of my life, the curse laid upon me by Providence. We had been squabbling continually for years, and I hated him. My God, how I hated him! I believe I had never hated anyone in my life as I hated him, especially at some moments. He was an elderly, dignified man, who worked part of his time as a tailor. But for some unknown reason he despised me beyond all measure, and looked down upon me insufferably. Though, indeed, he looked down upon everyone. Simply to glance at that flaxen, smoothly brushed head, at the tuft of hair he combed up on his forehead and oiled with sunflower oil, at that dignified mouth, compressed into the shape of the letter V, made one feel one was confronting a man who had never doubted of himself. He was a pedant to the most extreme point, the greatest pedant I had met on earth, and with that had a vanity only befitting Alexander of Macedon. He was in love with every button on his coat, every nail on his fingers, absolutely in love with them, and he looked it. In his behaviour to me he was a perfect tyrant. He spoke very little to me, and if he chanced to glance at me, he gave me a firm, majestically self-confident, and invariably ironical look that drove me sometimes to fury. He did his work with the air of doing me the greatest favour, though he did scarcely anything for me, and did not, indeed, consider himself bound to do anything. There could be no doubt that he looked upon me as the greatest fool on earth, and that he did not get rid of me was simply that he could get wages from me every month. He consented to do nothing for me for 7 roubles a month. Many sins should be forgiven me for what I suffered from him. My hatred reached such a point that sometimes his very step almost threw me into convulsions. What I loathed particularly was his lisp. His tongue must have been a little too long, or something of that sort, for he continually lisped, and seemed to be very proud of it, imagining that it greatly added to his dignity. He spoke in a slow, measured tone, with his hands behind his back and his eyes fixed on the ground. He maddened me particularly when he read aloud the Psalms to himself behind his partition. Many a battle I waged over that reading. But he was awfully fond of reading aloud in the evenings, in a slow, even, sing-song voice, as though over the dead. It is interesting that that is how he has ended. He hires himself out to read the Psalms over the dead, and at the same time he kills rats and makes blacking. But at that time I could not get rid of him. It was as though he were chemically combined with my existence. Besides, nothing would have induced him to consent to leave me. I could not live in furnished lodgings. My lodging was my private solitude, my shell, my cave, in which I concealed myself from all mankind, and Apollon seemed to me, for some reason, an integral part of that flat, and for 7 years I could not turn him away. To be 2 or 3 days behind his wages, for instance, was impossible. He would have made such a fuss I should not have known where to hide my head. But I was so exasperated with every one during those days that I made up my mind for some reason and with some object to punish Apollon and not to pay him for a fortnight the wages that were owing him. I had for a long time, for the last 2 years, been intending to do this, simply in order to teach him not to give himself airs with me, and to show him that if I liked I could withhold his wages. I purposed to say nothing to him about it, and was purposely silent indeed, in order to score off his pride and force him to be the first to speak of his wages. Then I would take the 7 roubles out of a drawer, show him I have the money put aside on purpose, but that I won't, I simply won't pay him his wages. I won't just because that is what I wish, because I am master, and it is for me to decide, because he has been disrespectful, because he has been rude. But if he were to ask respectfully, I might be softened and give it to him. Otherwise he might wait another fortnight, another 3 weeks, a whole month. But angry as I was, yet he got the better of me. I could not hold out for 4 days. He began as he always did begin in such cases, for there had been such cases already. There had been attempts. And it may be observed, I knew all this beforehand. I knew his nasty tactics by heart. He would begin by fixing upon me an exceedingly severe stare, keeping it up for several minutes at a time, particularly on meeting me or seeing me out of the house. If I held out and pretended not to notice those stares, he would, still in silence, proceed to further tortures. All at once, apropos of nothing, he would walk softly and smoothly into my room when I was pacing up and down or reading, stand at the door, one hand behind his back and one foot behind the other, and fix upon me a stare more than severe, utterly contemptuous. If I suddenly asked him what he wanted, he would make no answer, but continue staring at me persistently for some seconds. Then, with a peculiar compression of his lips and a most significant air, deliberately turn round and deliberately go back to his room. 2 hours later he would come out again and again present himself before me in the same way. It had happened that, in my fury, I did not even ask him what he wanted, but simply raised my head sharply and imperiously, and began staring back at him. So we stared at one another for 2 minutes. At last he turned with deliberation and dignity, and went back again for 2 hours. If I were still not brought to reason by all this, but persisted in my revolt, he would suddenly begin sighing while he looked at me, long deep sighs, as though measuring by them the depths of my moral degradation, and of course it ended at last by his triumphing completely. I raged and shouted, but still was forced to do what he wanted. This time the usual staring manoeuvres had scarcely begun when I lost my temper and flew at him in a fury. I was irritated beyond endurance apart from him. "Stay!" I cried in a frenzy, as he was slowly and silently turning, with one hand behind his back, to go to his room. "Stay! Come back, I tell you!" And I must have bawled so unnaturally that he turned round and even looked at me with some wonder. However, he persisted in saying nothing, and that infuriated me. "How dare you come and look at me like that without being sent for? Answer!" After looking at me calmly for half a minute, he began turning round again. "Stay!" I ordered, running up to him. "Don't stir. There! Answer, now! What did you come in to look at?" "If you have any order to give me, it's my duty to carry it out," he answered, after another silent pause, with a slow measured lisp, raising his eyebrows and calmly twisting his head from one side to another, all this with exasperating composure. "That's not what I am asking you about, you torturer!" I shouted, turning crimson with anger. "I'll tell you why you came here myself. You see, I don't give you your wages. You are so proud you don't want to bow down and ask for it, and so you come to punish me with your stupid stares, to worry me. And you have no suspicion how stupid it is. Stupid, 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 stupid!" He would have turned round again without a word, but I seized him. "Listen!" I shouted to him. "Here's the money. Do you see? Here it is." I took it out of the table drawer. "Here's the 7 roubles complete. But you are not going to have it. You are not going to have it until you come respectfully, with bowed head, to beg my pardon. Do you hear?" "That cannot be," he answered, with the most unnatural self-confidence. "It shall be so," I said. "I give you my word of honor it shall be. And there's nothing for me to beg your pardon for," he went on, as though he had not noticed my exclamations at all. "Why, besides, you called me a torturer, for which I can summon you at the police station at any time for insulting behavior." "Go! Summon me!" I roared. "Go at once, this very minute, this very second. You are a torturer all the same, a torturer." But he merely looked at me, then turned, and regardless of my loud calls to him, he walked to his room with an even step and without looking round. If it had not been for Liza, nothing of this would have happened, I decided inwardly. Then, after waiting a minute, I went myself behind his screen with a dignified and solemn air, though my heart was beating slowly and violently. "Apollon," I said quietly and emphatically, though I was breathless, "go at once without a minute's delay, and fetch the police officer." He had meanwhile settled himself at his table, put on his spectacles, and taken up some sewing. But hearing my order, he burst into a guffaw. "At once! Go this minute! Go on! or else you can't imagine what will happen. You are certainly out of your mind, he observed, without even raising his head, lisping as deliberately as ever, and threading his needle. Who ever heard of a man sending for the police against himself? And as for being frightened, you are upsetting yourself about nothing, for nothing will come of it. Go! I shrieked, clutching him by the shoulder. I felt I should strike him in a minute. But I did not notice the door from the passage softly and slowly open at that instant, and a figure come in, stop short, and begin staring at us in perplexity. I glanced, nearly swooned with shame, and rushed back to my room. There, clutching at my hair with both hands, I leaned my head against the wall and stood motionless in that position. 2 minutes later I heard Apollon's deliberate footsteps. "There is some woman asking for you," he said, looking at me with peculiar severity. Then he stood aside and let in Liza. He would not go away, but stared at us sarcastically. "Go away! Go away!" I commanded in desperation. At that moment my clock began whirring and wheezing, and struck 7. 9. Into my house come bold and free, its rightful mistress there to be. I stood before her crushed, crestfallen, revoltingly confused, and I believe I smiled as I did my utmost to wrap myself in the skirts of my ragged, wadded dressing-gown, exactly as I had imagined the scene not long before in a fit of depression. After standing over us for a couple of minutes, Apollon went away, but that did not make me more at ease. What made it worse was that she too was overwhelmed with confusion, more so, in fact, than I should have expected. At the sight of me, of course. "Sit down," I said mechanically, moving a chair up to the table, and I sat down on the sofa. She obediently sat down at once and gazed at me open-eyed, evidently expecting something from me at once. This naivete of expectation drove me to fury, but I restrained myself. She ought to have tried not to notice, as though everything had been as usual. But instead of that and I dimly felt that I should make her pay dearly for all this. "You have found me in a strange position, Liza," I began, stammering and knowing that this was the wrong way to begin. No, don't imagine anything," I cried, seeing that she had suddenly flushed. "I am not ashamed of my poverty. On the contrary, I look with pride on my poverty. I am poor, but honorable. One can be poor and honorable," I muttered. "However, would you like tea?" "No," she was beginning. "Wait a minute." I leaped up and ran to Apollon. I had to get out